right, if you're listing the blue bloods in college football, you don't have to go too far down the list to reach Oklahoma and Alabama. So this gets the juices pumping when we talk about SEC pride, Big 12 pride, national landscape of college football, historic images of the past of these two great programs. Again, Alabama and Oklahoma. And it's a BCS game in the Sugar Bowl this year, and a game that will match the SEC and the Big 12 in future years. And here to break it down is Matt Hofeld of Crimson and Cream Machine of the SB Nation. And Matt, we thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me on, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Okay, from an outsider's perspective, the Oklahoma program is not quite what it's been, considering the lofty expectations and standards that have been there since the 40s and 50s, but specifically what Bob Stoops established in his second year in winning a national championship. Okay, your thoughts just where Oklahoma stands right now in regards to coming off a fine 10-2 season, but the expectations there in Oklahoma and on a national scene of this team needing to contend for national championships.
Well, I'm an Oklahoma fan, and that's the reason why I have an Oklahoma website. But I often say this. I say it on my podcast, I say it on a website, and I say it in conversation that Oklahoma may be one of the most unrealistic fan bases out there in the world of college football, because anything short of a championship is a failure amongst the fan base. That said, a lot of people looked at this as a rebuilding season. When we did our preseason picks for the Sooners on our website, crimsonandcreammachine.com, we variously people involved picked them anywhere from 9-3 to 10-2. I don't think we had a better prediction than 10-2, which is where Oklahoma ended up being. And so from that standpoint, it's kind of on par with what we thought way back in August. But when you look at the way the season started, you get the big win in South Bend against Notre Dame. The idea was, and it always goes this, that the season could have been much more. The quarterback situation didn't pan out due to injury, or also you could say lack of productivity. And so there's Oklahoma, in our opinion, and I say our opinion, I mean the fan base, Oklahoma left a lot on the field and 2 losses against Texas and against Baylor, where you can't help but question, had Oklahoma done this different or had they planned something else, that those games could have turned out differently than what they did. That said, being 10-2, beating your in-state rival in the final game of the season when you come into that game as a double-digit underdog, and finding yourself in the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, that's a pretty good consolation to a disappointing season. And it also puts a lot on the line for Oklahoma in the area of building for next year, as well as the recruiting process that leading up to National Signing Day in February.
All right, let's match up the offense and the defense. So let's start with the Sooners' offense. And regardless of what we see in the national championship game, this still may be the best team in college football in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, losing one game in heartbreaking fashion. Okay, so the Oklahoma offense has been extremely spotty this year. You've played 2 quarterbacks. Knight won the job early. Blake Bell took over and found some success. And again, the offensive production has been quite spotty. Can you size things up in regards to what needs to happen for the Sooners to be successful against a very strong Alabama defense?
Well, yeah, first of all, I agree. I think Alabama is the best team in the nation. They lost on a fluke play to Auburn, and that's no slight or disrespect to Auburn. Give them credit for winning that game. But, how many times, I don't know how long you've been covering college football, but I think we're both pretty avid college football fans and watch a lot of games. How many times have you seen a game end like that? So, Oklahoma definitely has their hands full, and, they have issues on offense. There's no way to disguise it. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Oklahoma has significant issues, on the offensive side of the football. And if Alabama can stop the Sooners from running, then it's going to be a long, long night for Oklahoma, because the passing game has been what has really been Oklahoma's Achilles heel this season. Oklahoma, they're going to want to try to go with Trevor Knight. I think you'll see both Trevor Knight and Blake Bell play in this game, which means you're going to get 2 different offensive looks depending on which quarterback's in there. But Oklahoma's going to try to do a lot of misdirection. They're going to put the receivers in motion. They're going to run the zone option, the zone read. There's going to be all kinds of things that they're going to bring everything but the kitchen sink, so to speak. That said, all Alabama has to do is stop Oklahoma from moving the ball on the ground, and if they're able to do that, if they're able to play, fundamentally sound football, which, that comes with Alabama. Those two things go hand in hand. Their defensive ends are going to have to, keep their containment on the outside. Their linebackers are going to have to fill the gaps. And if you force Oklahoma to throw, you never know what you're going to get. Blake Bell, he's kind of like the Bedlam hero around here. 2 years in a row, he's come up with huge plays to win the Bedlam game. Last year, it was scoring to put the game into overtime in Norman. This year, it was the game-winning touchdown with just a few seconds left in Stillwater. But the reality of the situation is Oklahoma doesn't win the Bedlam game if they don't have some terrific special teams plays. You got Jalen Saunders running a punt back for a touchdown. You've got the fake field goal that leads to a touchdown. You remove those two plays, and Oklahoma loses the Bedlam game, and they're not going to be. We're previewing the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl instead of the Sugar Bowl here with the Sooners. So Oklahoma's going to have to get big plays from special teams. That is a huge part of what Oklahoma does this year, and they've got key playmakers there. You've got guys like Jalen Saunders. You've got guys like Sterling Shepard, Brennan Clay, who is a great running back for the Sooners and is really gunning for a 1,000-yard season and may get that in the Sugar Bowl. But he's also going to be returning kickoffs. A speedster by the name of Roy Finch is going to be returning kickoffs. Oklahoma has to get huge plays on the special teams area, and that also includes limiting what Alabama can do in their return game. And then I think the last thing Oklahoma has to do offensively is they've got to protect the football. You can't give Alabama anything. That's a given. You turn the ball over against Alabama, you're just digging your own grave. And so it's a tall task for this Oklahoma offense, but it was a tall task in the Bedlam game, and I know we can't really compare Oklahoma State to Alabama, but you can compare the game plan. What Oklahoma had to play flawless in that game, and that's pretty much what they did, and the same thing's going to carry into the Sugar Bowl.
Matt, you mentioned a number of dynamic playmakers just a second ago. I get to see Oklahoma about 4 times a year. There's one guy that stands out amongst that group, at least from my perspective. That's Jalen Saunders. Right. Do you expect him to be a bit of an X factor in this game that the Oklahoma coaching staff is going to try to get his hands on the football as much as possible?
Oh, absolutely. I think he has to. You're going to see him. He's going to be the guy that returns the punts. He's going to be a guy that's going to be everywhere on the field on offense. You're going to see him line up on the edge. You'll see him line up in the slot. You're going to see him go in motion a whole lot. And so, he's definitely a guy that Alabama's going to have to keep tabs of. But the other guy that you're going to have in that same mold is a guy named Sterling Shepard, who is a younger guy. He's only a sophomore, where Saunders is a senior. And Shepard has also been able to do some of those those jet sweeps where the receivers go in motion. He's been the target of a throwback, and on some of the trick plays. So those two guys are going to be the keys. What Oklahoma is going to try to do against Alabama, what I believe they're going to try to do, at least what I believe they should do, because they don't pay me to coach the team, just to analyze them. I think Oklahoma's going to have to attack the edges. They're going to have to use their speed on the outside, and Jalen Saunders comes in huge on that by just getting him a ball in a quick swing pass or putting him in motion and throwing to him in the flat, or just giving the ball in motion. He's gonna come up as a play that Oklahoma is going to absolutely put the ball in his hands.
Okay, you mentioned Trevor Knight and Blake Bell both should get some action at quarterback at their best. Each one of their best play that we could possibly see in the Sugar Bowl game. What should we expect to see out of each quarterback, and what do Oklahoma fans need to see out of each quarterback?
Well, at their absolute best, Trevor Knight is electric. I mean, he's a guy that he just makes the plays, but he makes them with his feet. He's a master of the zone read. Oklahoma State, they had 7 in the box against him, and he was still chewing up yards before he got injured in that game. He's a guy that he's quicker than what he looks. He's not going to be real accurate throwing the ball. The big plays that's going to come from Trevor Knight is going to set up what he does either with his feet or giving the ball away on the zone read because he draws so much attention. Blake Bell, he's the best way to describe him is he's a gamer, and the knock against him really is a issue of experience in that he's not real quick to make a decision. But yet you have the moments of I like to say the moments of brilliance, like the drive that he led. Again, we go back to this Oklahoma State game. With just over a minute left, he drove the field to put Oklahoma up for good in that game, and made probably the best throw of his career to the back corner of the end zone for the go-ahead touchdown. So he's the better passer of the two, and don't sleep on his ability to run. He's just not as quick as what Trevor Knight is. However, he's big, and so therefore he's hard to take down. He's just got to make quicker decisions, not necessarily better decisions, but quicker decisions with the football in his hand. Both of those guys, I think you're going to play. I think you're going to probably see Trevor Knight start, and you're going to see, just depending on the situation, you're going to see both of the guys play. But they'll be able to give Oklahoma a chance. But they, like you said, at their best, and they're absolutely going to have to be at their best in this game.
Let's flip to the other side of the football. Alabama has elite athleticism, so we can kind of compare their ability on the outside. Even though they don't put up the numbers that Baylor does, it's because of the scheme and because of the style of offense. But I don't know that Oklahoma's seen a team that can just pound it straight ahead. Alabama had some issues along the offensive line after losing 2 first-round NFL picks plus an Outland Trophy winner last season. They had some issues early in the season, got those straightened out as we would expect the Nick Saban coaching staff to do very quickly, and they have run the football extremely well with Kenyon Drake and TJ Yeldon. So can you look at anybody on Oklahoma's schedule to see where Oklahoma could possibly match up and stop this running game?
No, unfortunately, the best, to me, the best example of what Oklahoma's going to face in this running attack is what Texas did to the Sooners. And they were able to draw all the attention with their running backs, and then they were able to hit receivers downfield in one-on-one coverage. I think Oklahoma's going to have to play Alabama very similar defensively to the way that they played Texas. Now, if you're looking for a silver lining here, in the Texas game, it was the first game without linebacker Corey Nelson. Dominic Alexander is a freshman who's come in and has played very well in replacing Corey Nelson. He has a lot more experience now than he did in that game against Texas. But the thing that really the thing where Alabama's offense, I think, finds success is they're really, really good at being balanced. And you mentioned the offensive line. You mentioned losing the guys to the NFL draft. But the one thing that we talked about this on our podcast just this week, the one thing that really strikes me about Alabama's offensive line is, you mentioned losing those guys and having to come together and gel and become a cohesive unit. But McCarron has been sacked half as many times this year as he was last year in the national championship season. So that speaks well of Oklahoma's offensive line. The Sooners are going to have to find a way to scheme against a balanced offense, and that's the conundrum. What do you try to take away? Do you try to take away T.J. Yeldon and you give yourself open to one-on-one coverage on the outside with the receivers, or do you focus on stopping the passing attack and hope that your defensive tackles can fill the gaps and your linebackers can play sound enough to stop the running game? It's definitely a huge challenge for Oklahoma.
As a big Oklahoma fan and supporter and writer and insider, who excites you on your defense? Who are the guys that are ball hawks, can come off the edge, make things happen, turn the ball over, make those game-changing kind of plays?
Well, at this point of the season, you look at younger guys that you're excited to see play again next year, and that brings you to guys like Charles Tapper, who's a sophomore, who is a defensive end, who's just he's a bull rusher. He has the power, and he has deceptive speed. I mean, he can chase down quarterbacks from behind and make lots of plays. There's a guy named Eric Stryker, who is a linebacker, who is a blitzing specialist. He's not real big. Sometimes he struggles in run support, which he's going to have to come up huge in run support in this game. But he's the guy, if you, again, go back to the play against Notre Dame, the first play of the game where the Sooners come in on a blitz, and it's Eric Stryker who hits the Notre Dame quarterback, causing the interception that leads to Oklahoma's first touchdown in that game. So those are some younger guys that really are exciting to watch. Then you've got some veterans, guys like Gabe Lynn, who's a safety who can he's a guy who likes to deliver those slobber-knocking hits. And he's a power guy. He's a safety that can cover but also can come up and knock down a running back. There was a couple of years ago against Ball State, a running back caught the ball in the flat, and Gabe Lynn hit him on a very clean hit, but it's one of those plays where the running back's helmet comes off and the running back's just kind of left unconscious on the field. And that's the type of guy that Gabe Lynn is. He's a senior, definitely going to be missed next year. But when it comes to Oklahoma's defense, the anchor is absolutely cornerback Aaron Colvin, who is a legitimate NFL prospect. I think he'll have a successful and long NFL career, and on the collegiate level, he's a guy that can shut down half of the field, and that's going to be huge for Oklahoma, because I think the Sooners are going to leave their defensive backs in one-on-one coverage with the Alabama receivers, and knowing that you've got a guy like Aaron Colvin out there who can take away a guy, that's huge for Oklahoma.
One of the more intriguing storylines during bowl season for me is the conference matchups, conference pride. And the SEC doesn't have ownership on pride in college football. The Big 12 is a very proud conference, specifically those two institutions in Texas and Norman, Oklahoma. There was a matchup in the Cotton Bowl last year where Oklahoma matched up with Texas A&M for a half, if I remember correctly, in watching that football game. Then Johnny Manziel got things on a roll, and all heck broke loose in the second half, and the Sooners were buried in the second half after competing very well in the first half. Bob Stoops made some comments a couple years ago in regards to SEC defenses dominating statistically and not facing the best quarterbacking, and at a time when Colt McCoy, Sam Bradford, Brandon Weeden, and we could go through a few other top-notch signal callers in the Big 12 at that point, defenses in the Big 12 had to deal with NFL-caliber quarterbacking and not necessarily that being the case at the time in the SEC. Things have flip-flopped, and the SEC defenses have not been as impressive, again, statistically, as they had in the past. But again, we look at the quarterbacking play in the SEC, and we've seen a notch or two better, and probably the best quarterbacking the league has seen in quite some time with Johnny Manziel and Aaron Murray and A.J. McCarron and others. Your thoughts on Bob Stoops and what is becoming a bit of a rivalry between the Big 12 and the SEC that's only going to be fueled by now a contract in the Sugar Bowl between these two conferences going forward?
Well, first of all, that contract in the Sugar Bowl has got to be exciting because of what you just said, the conference pride between the two schools. I think another thing that kind of spurs that conference rivalry was Texas A&M and Missouri leaving the Big 12 to join the SEC, and so that just kind of added to it. And the Cotton Bowl, again, I was there. I saw it firsthand. That was my first real glimpse of Johnny Manziel live and in person. And that was a big game because not only was it SEC versus Big 12, but it was Oklahoma and A&M, the first time they had met each other post-Big 12 conference play. And Bob Stoops, I mean, I'm going to defend Bob Stoops. I'm going to say he had a point in what he said. I'm also going to say that if there's a conference that deserves to beat their chest and raise their banner higher than anybody else at this point, you can't deny the SEC and what they've been able to accomplish by winning the last 7 national championships. So, but, you know, Bob Stoops has a point. You've got the guys you mentioned. I would throw Robert Griffin III in there as well. All those guys that you mentioned are currently on NFL rosters. And you know, all of a sudden you got a guy named like Johnny Manziel, Aaron Murray, those guys showing up in the SEC and getting experience. And suddenly defenses in the SEC aren't what they used to be. And another thing that you've seen a transition, so to speak, in the SEC is a move away from the power-type offense to really the spread offense and a quicker strike offense. And the SEC offensively now, I would say, is where the Big 12 was probably from 2007 to 2012, really with all these high-profile quarterbacks and the speed offenses, the quick strike. You know, they stretch the field wide instead of stretch the field deep. And then all of a sudden, you got a lot of one-on-one matchups. And if you don't have the athletes to win every one-on-one matchup, then they're going to find that advantage and they're going to exploit that. And so I think Bob Stoops, again, in jest, tongue-in-cheek, and almost a little bit of getting back at you. Remember, Bob Stoops is a defensive guy. He prided himself on not only the turnaround at Oklahoma, but it really started with a turnaround on defense. That 2000 national championship was a defensive masterpiece. And that's where Bob Stoops, you know, that's where he puts the feather in his cap. And the criticism that came to the Big 12 with the way these quarterbacks are running their offenses, I think is something that kind of hit Bob Stoops personally, because it's a tough offense to try to defend. And all of a sudden the scoring averages skyrocket in the conference in the Big 12. And the criticism is, well, the Big 12 offenses aren't that good. The Big 12 defenses just are that bad. Well, now all of a sudden the shoe's on the other foot. And when you look at the SEC, you have to ask yourself the question, are the offenses really that good, or are the defenses that bad? And I think what the answer lies in what Bob Stoops is saying, the quarterback. All of a sudden you got these guys that can throw the ball around. You got guys like Johnny Manziel who are dual threat guys. Manziel can hurt you with his arm just as quickly as he can hurt you with his legs, and Oklahoma experienced that firsthand in the Cotton Bowl back in January. So I think it just kind of spurs the rivalry. It's going to make it fun, not only this Sugar Bowl, but the the subsequent Sugar Bowls that follow between these two conferences. But on the other hand, I also think it's something that may come back to bite Bob Stoops a little bit in this bowl game against Alabama, because Alabama, they probably wear the pride, the SEC conference pride, on their sleeve more than any other school, because for so many years they've been the pride of the SEC. And here's a team, again, you and I are guilty of just saying this. They're a team that they're not even conference champions, but yet a lot of people are still saying this is the best team in the country. So Alabama has a lot of pride, and they have good reason for it.
He is Matt Hofeld. He covers Oklahoma football for SB Nation at Crimson and Cream Machine, and I've checked out a lot of the articles, and he has some tremendous insight into Oklahoma, and as the matchups come across during the course of the season, a lot of insight into the Big 12 overall. Matt, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mark. Have a Merry Christmas, man.
Merry Christmas to you.
All right, see you, buddy.